And they asked me, like, well, did that bother you? And I go, well, no, it doesn't bother me. One, I don't think any of them are as good as mine, so it just makes mine look better and better, and my dialogue look better and better.
This is the part of Pulp Fiction that Tarantino wanted you to miss. 5 liters of blood, a hitchhiker who was held as a slave for 7 years, and a sequence that was so graphic that the reviews almost pulled the plug. After receiving rejection letters from every major company, Quentin Tarantino shot a film so bizarre that no one talks about it anymore. It wasn't edited. The scene in question was completely removed. That's why it was meant to remain hidden from view. Quentin Tarantino and Roger Avary, 2 teenage cinema buffs, began brainstorming their dream projects at a little Manhattan Beach video store. They were both surprised by how huge one of those thoughts got. The script Pandemonium Reigns, written by Avary, had an unusual and memorable tale about a pawn shop, a guy wearing a leather mask and a gold watch. That bizarre and intense portion would go on to play a significant role in Pulp Fiction. The collaboration between Tarantino and Avary deviated from the typical Hollywood model. In Amsterdam, when Reservoir Dogs gained notice, the members began assembling scenes, at times physically taping together parts of screenplays. However, Avary quickly departed to make Killing Zoe, his debut feature film. After nearly 2 years of revising and improving the script, Tarantino persisted. Though Avary's ideas were nevertheless heavily included, he contributed the most of the astute dialogue. They shared the Best Original Screenplay Oscar when the picture was released. The night they had that bizarre speech, where Avary only thanked his wife and mentioned that he wanted to go urinate, was the pinnacle of their artistic collaboration. Remarkably, following that, they never collaborated again. However, Pulp Fiction as a title is somewhat older. It had been in use since the 1890s, long before Tarantino coined the phrase. Printed on rough wood pulp paper, inexpensive periodicals of the time could be offered for nearly nothing. These pulps were so jam-packed with genres that readers couldn't get enough: action, crime, mystery, and science fiction. Argosy, one of the earliest, quickly became a monthly bestseller, selling more than 500,000 copies. Some of the characters introduced in these stories went on to feature in hundreds more stories, such as the investigator Nick Carter. Because of their rawness, speed, and abundance of larger-than-life characters, pulps influenced Americans' views on narrative. Tarantino aimed to convey that precise attitude in his film, one that is gritty, startling, and full of style. His moniker paid homage to the rule-free, chaotic environment. It was more than simply catchy. Producing Pulp Fiction was still no picnic. Jersey Films signed Tarantino and producer Lawrence Bender in 1993. It included a small office and enough funding to begin pitching the script to potential studios. It appeared good at first. Columbia TriStar even noted it as an ongoing endeavor. Things swiftly deteriorated, though. The picture was scrapped by the studio by summertime. An executive deemed it the most awful script they had ever perused. They despised the fact that figures might die and then rise again. They failed to get the joke. It was too strange, too violent, and they didn't understand it. A few even went so far as to say it wouldn't be worthwhile without a major celebrity, or that the drug sequences would detract from the overall experience. Miramax was able to get in because of the refusal. Harvey Weinstein read the screenplay and thought it was fantastic. Disney had recently acquired the studio. Strange architecture and wild sights were of little concern to him. What mattered was that he witnessed something extraordinary. Miramax supported the $8.5 million budget and granted Tarantino complete creative authority. They saved $500,000 by finishing ahead of schedule. An astute decision that contributed to its success was paying all performers the same amount each week, rather than paying enormous fees to famous actors. When the 90s rolled around, John Travolta's career was very much over. More famous for his baby chat with Kirstie Alley than for anything else, he was the Grease has-been. The suits in Hollywood lost it when Quentin Tarantino expressed his desire to cast him as Vincent Vega in Pulp Fiction. After inking his contract with Miramax and Disney, Harvey Weinstein battled tooth and nail to stop it. It was Daniel Day-Lewis he desired. Even Sean Penn was offered an opportunity by him. However, Tarantino remained steadfast. The risk altered everything, but Travolta's salary took a huge hit, from millions to only $140,000, after a vicious back and forth. Travolta regained his prominence after receiving an Oscar nomination, and Weinstein was forced to retract his statement. Samuel L. Jackson was engaged in his own conflict at the same time. He had his heart set on playing Jules until Paul Calderone nearly grabbed the part. Angry and armed with a greasy Big Kahuna burger bag, Jackson stormed into the audition. The fact that one studio executive mistakenly referred to him as Lawrence Fishburne did not assist matters. All of a sudden, Jackson lost it, brought Jules Winfield's fury into the room, and everyone froze. It wasn't acting. That was an authentic performance. Plus, Jackson absolutely adored the Jerry curl wig, which was actually an accidental purchase. The NWA feeling, he remarked, was there. The director Tarantino was in agreement. Matt Dillon came next. The part of Butch Coolidge had been written for him by Tarantino. He couldn't help but lose it. Dillon was hesitant, saying he needed to think about it, and might have preferred to play Vincent. His career-defining part was taken the next day by Bruce Willis, all because he paused. Without hesitation or consideration, he acted on impulse when he noticed Butch was available. He had feelings for Vincent as well. Particularly in that eerie pawnshop scenario, it was effective. Willis made a killing off of one of his most famous parts, while Dillon sat on the sidelines as the picture went viral. After that, Uma Thurman arrived. Before her, names like Madonna, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Meg Ryan were considered for the role. Her first reaction upon reading the script was one of contempt. Her representative, however, noticed the gold and insisted that she meet with Tarantino. She had a complete change of heart after a lengthy lunch and profound discussion in her New York apartment. Her name changed to Mia Wallace. The iconic photo of her smoking on the bed catapulted her to stardom in Hollywood. It was originally intended that nothing of this would transpire. In an effort to link it to Reservoir Dogs, Tarantino cast Michael Madsen as Vincent. However, Madsen opted to star in a Western instead. Lawrence Fishburne was also cast in Jules, but he turned down the role because he felt it glorified heroin. Some even suggested casting two British men, Tim Roth and Gary Oldman, to play Jules and Vincent. Charles S. Dutton and Eddie Murphy were also mentioned. All those names vanished, though, as soon as Jackson entered the room. Something out of the ordinary occurred at Cannes on a late May night in 1994. An unexpectedly extravagant celebration ensued from a midnight screening, which is often held for unconventional entrants or cult aspirants. In fact, Pulp Fiction didn't slyly slip into the festival, it pounded on the door. Instead of treating it like an arty independent film, Harvey and Bob Weinstein jetted the whole cast to France for the premiere. All of Travolta, Jackson, Thurman, and Willis's whereabouts were tracked by cameras. There was a palpable buzz. Viewers were captivated by the film's violent moments, incisive conversation, and out-of-order scenes. They couldn't tear themselves away. 4 members of the jury advocated for redistributing the top award to someone else, while 4 others supported Tarantino. The only one who could break the deadlock was the president of the jury, Clint Eastwood. Suddenly, Quentin Tarantino's name would be known throughout the globe after Pulp Fiction took home the Palme d'Or. However, that was only the first step. As soon as they returned to the United States, the Weinsteins launched a PR campaign with the ferocity of an invasion. They went against the grain of most independent producers by trying to have the picture talk for itself. They enlisted the help of influential critics, had parties on boats, plastered posters of Uma Thurman's face everywhere, and had a lavish lunch at Eden Rock. Additionally, they succeeded in having TriStar, the company that had originally decided to reject the picture due to its drug sequences, relinquish the rights. The Weinsteins were willing to risk $8 million on a film that was strong on language but lacked a distinct genre. Pulp Fiction then went into almost 1,300 theaters across the United States, which was the most insane part. It didn't trickle down to little theaters at all. It was unprecedented for an independent picture. The studios first thought they were insane, but by limiting the film's release after Cannes to a few of important festivals, they managed to generate an unprecedented amount of interest. People flocked to view it as soon as it opened wide. While Stallone's The Specialist bombed after its first weekend, Pulp Fiction continued to do well week after week, earning $9.3 million. When compared to the action blockbusters it had played over its first 2 weekends, the decline was negligible. At year's end, it was very clear who had prevailed in the actual battle. Pulp Fiction didn't only turn a profit, it revolutionized the industry. The film grossed nearly $213 million globally, despite only having a $8 million budget. Hollywood was taken aback by that type of comeback. It demonstrated that low-budget films with lengthy dialogue and bizarre characters may outperform their more expensive counterparts at the box office. After purchasing Miramax, Disney had an epiphany. Their eccentric small studio may be more influential than they had anticipated. The Academy Awards took note, nominating 2 of its films for Best Picture. Even though Forrest Gump came out on top in that contest, its defeat is still a topic of discussion. One of the most infamous cinematic mysteries of all time is the briefcase from Pulp Fiction. Every time someone opens it, they appear as if they have just beheld a celestial marvel. It is golden and shimmers. How about the contents of that case? Many admirers have proposed rather outlandish hypotheses. The widely accepted one states that it contained Marcellus Wallace's spirit. Some even go so far as to claim that the peculiar band-aid on the back of his neck and the eerie 666 combination on the lock represent the devil's collection of souls through the back of the head, referencing an old folk tale. It may sound strange, but it all makes sense when you see the scene where the case opens and Vincent looks at it as if he's captivated. Even more compelling than the money involved is the premise that Jules's miraculous survival in a gunfight is a result of divine intervention. Although some do not subscribe to the soul notion, some of the more realistic fans think the briefcase really contained diamonds, like the ones in Reservoir Dogs. Since Vincent and Vic Vega in Reservoir Dogs are supposedly siblings, the idea that the 2 films were related gained traction in the mid-1990s. Even Tarantino contemplated directing a film centered around them. The fact that Pulp Fiction's co-writer acknowledged that the case was initially intended to involve diamonds only served to strengthen this hypothesis. They may have abandoned the concept during filming, but fans never let go of it, especially since Tarantino said that the majority of his films take place in the same world. As a result, the diamond hypothesis shifted from being an outlandish notion to an integral component of the overall plan. The most outlandish hypothesis is that the bag contained Elvis Presley's iconic gold lame costume, as seen on the cover of his most renowned album. After the movie came out, the concept went viral online, even though it seems crazy. Perhaps Jules wasn't joking when he said, "It's just his boss's dirty laundry," as fans pointed out. In addition, the luminous light makes perfect sense as it reflects off of that lustrous golden outfit. The fact that Tarantino had an Elvis character in True Romance and is a tremendous lover of the king makes it seem plausible. It wasn't about money, but about cultural power, according to others, which is why the characters behave as if they're staring at something legendary. The catch, though, is that Tarantino deliberately kept the contents of the container a secret from you. The entire purpose was that. In interviews, he often stated his desire for listeners to interpret his words in their own way. Even with Aldo Rain's mysterious neck scar in Inglourious Bastards, he pulled this stunt. His technique is to let people discuss and ponder for as long as they want. Blood splattered over the automobile as Vincent Vega unexpectedly shot Marvin in the face. That's the Pulp Fiction moment that most people remember. The thing they are unaware of is that the version seen in the finished film was actually a toned-down version. In the earlier, even more gruesome take, Tarantino had actor Phil Lamar's prosthetic bust explode in place of CGI, making Marvin's head explode. It was custom-made for that very moment, brimming with lifelike brain tissue, artificial blood, and explosive charges to create the most terrifying and realistic head explosion imaginable. They spent almost half a day filming it inside a Chevy Nova at a studio in Burbank, using more than 5 liters of blood. However, that cut was ultimately cut from the film. Rather than an innovative shift, it was a ruse. Tarantino purposefully handed the MPAA ratings board something to cut because he knew they would want it. He included this extremely graphic, violent sequence, expecting that it would be cut. If the ratings board insisted on changes, he might remove the exploding head while retaining the terrifying scene in the basement with the Stutunatinti. That scenario was far more unsettling, but it was less explicit. Even though he achieved exactly what he wanted, Tarantino gave the impression that he had compromised by omitting the head explosion. After all these years, Phil Lamar finally spilled the beans in an interview for the 30th anniversary of Pulp Fiction. According to him, Tarantino told him bluntly, "We're going to show this young black kid getting his brains blown out for the ratings people so you can leave in some other things." Lamar was 27 years old when he played Marvin, and that role stayed with him even though he only had a brief appearance on screen. Although he only got $5,000 for 3 days of labor, the part launched his voice acting career, which has since expanded to include projects like Samurai Jack and Futurama. A sequence that was removed from the original version of Pulp Fiction never made it to theaters, but it may have altered our perception of Vincent Vega and Mia Wallace. Vincent is surprised with a handheld camcorder by Mia just before their memorable night out at Jack Rabbit Slim's. Sitting in her living room, she asks him a litany of questions, some of which are lighthearted and others of which are more penetrating. She was attempting to figure him out through this small chat. This was one of her most revealing inquiries. Are you more of a fan of the Beatles or Elvis? Without uttering a word, Vincent's Elvis persona was immediately apparent to Mia. Although seemingly insignificant, that fact determined the course of events. While Vincent battled to maintain his composure, she dominated as the inquisitive and erratic host. The way she probed him, gradually elevating an inane game to a more intimate level, demonstrated her penchant for putting people through their paces. Despite her persistent advances, Vincent remained composed and played along. Their chemistry was born out of an intriguing power struggle, shrouded in mystery and charm, rather than a romantic relationship. Even before they stepped out of the home, you could feel the tension rising, albeit it was all quite natural. Most people don't notice this, but later on, when they enter Jack Rabbit Slim's, Mia grins and adds, "An Elvis man should love this." In the original scenario, it made perfect sense because she knew he was an Elvis fan. Now, it seems like a silly aside. The quirky design, rock and roll spirit, and vintage 1950s vibes of that restaurant were deliberate choices. They complemented Vincent's style and demeanor. That one removed moment demonstrated Mia's excellent early assessment of him and added depth to the entire dinner scenario. The moment was deeply meaningful to Quentin Tarantino, who had written it long before filming had begun. However, he had to make a difficult decision during editing. It seemed like you'd watched this same interview a dozen times in the early 90s. The tempo was off. The interview was also too lengthy. Tarantino was concerned that his picture would seem stale because he isn't one to follow fads. For the purpose of rhythm, he chopped off one of his favorite scenes between Vincent and Mia. This maneuver exemplifies the meticulous planning that went into making Pulp Fiction. In order to maintain a tight and memorable larger image, he was willing to sacrifice a good scene. There was another scene in Pulp Fiction's initial edit that was almost adapted for the big screen, but ultimately did not. An almost 3-minute-long rant was delivered by Eric Stoltz, who played drug dealer Lance. The bizarrely flawless footage was filmed in Panorama City in October 1993, when Lance was furiously shouting at a petrol station attendant who had deliberately given him the wrong instructions. The haughty man sent Lance on a pointless 40-minute drive through the valley, and he snapped. He moved from somewhat irritated to completely out of control, ranting and wailing like a lunatic. Tarantino savored every moment of the prepared and improvised banter, which Stoltz delivered with finesse. It was aggressive, pointed, and strangely humorous. This scene was supposed to be a reflection of the one before it, in which Vincent Vega goes into a panic when someone keyed his beloved Malibu. The two men, both deadly, are unraveling over insignificant issues. Starting with Vincent's diatribe and ending with Lance's, the two scenes seamlessly transitioned into the date with Mia in the original screenplay. Make you chuckle at their small-mindedness, then hit you over the head with an overdose scenario. That was the objective. Its intended effect of confusing the user was successful. However, Tarantino encountered an issue in early 1994 while locking the final cut. The film was about 3 hours long, which meant something had to be deleted. The edit room was his refuge, but he knew the Lance monologue was dragging everything down, so he chopped it, no matter how much he loved it. It was the most difficult choice they had to make for the picture, says his editor, Sally Menke. According to Tarantino, it's killing my movie, despite his claims that the moment was a killer, demonstrating his determination to maintain a tight pace. If the gold gets in the way, he will not hesitate to cut it out. Tarantino has always adhered to the dictum he learnt from Harvey Keitel in his Reservoir Dogs days: murder your darlings. He once removed 35 minutes of Django Unchained. Yeah, Lance's diatribe was discarded since it didn't contribute to the larger goal, regardless of how clever it was. In Tarantino's universe, anything that slows down the pace, even for a second, is immediately forgotten, no matter how memorable, passionate, or amusing it was. For decades, audiences have been plagued by Pulp Fiction's noir twang scene, not by what is shown, but by what is not spoken. The much darker history of the kinks that was never included in the final edit was previously disclosed by Quentin Tarantino. He claims that 7 years before, to the events shown in the film, Zed and Menard picked up the poin off the side of the road. They slowly degraded him, indoctrinated him, and transformed him into the disguised, mute man we observed dangling in the basement. In fact, Tarantino had already shot an extended version that clarified everything. It demonstrated how they had total control over the Warsuites, but in the end, Tarantino opted to remove that footage because, as he had suspected, the impact would be greater if details were left ambiguous. As information became scarcer, people's imaginations ran wild, creating a reality far worse than anything he could have depicted on TV. And further heartbreaking detail has been revealed by Tarantino. The man does not wake up after Butch knocks him out. Rather, he dies. The reason he was dangling on a rope was more dangerous than the punch itself. The moment he blacked out, the rope was tightened, and that was the end of it. The instant he passed away was the exact second he might have been let free, after years of captivity. A previously unreleased cab scene with Butch and Esmeralda from the original Pulp Fiction never reached theaters, although it would have greatly enhanced the picture otherwise. Cab driver Esmeralda, portrayed by Angela Jones, was more than a one-dimensional eccentric. She possessed nuance. Esmeralda begins by telling Butch that Floyd, his opponent, died in the ring in this extended version. However, the conversation takes a different turn as she begins to explain that, in her Colombian culture, death is not perceived as an end, but as a transition. When she was 9 years old, her grandfather passed away, and ever since then, her outlook on life has been forever altered. Her statements were profound, meaningful, and not at all lighthearted. After seeing Angela Jones in the short film Curdled, Tarantino cast her. Her voice was soothing yet eerie, and she offered it to Esmeralda. However, Esmeralda resists Butch's assertion that our names don't mean shit since he is American in one scene. An eerie remark follows. Names and death? Those are the two things that connect everyone. She goes on to suggest that violence is the most honest thing that people do. That gives Butch a bad buzz. Evidently, it irritates him. A deeper exploration into Butch's psyche is also present in the extended cut of the sequence. He tells Esmeralda that he didn't feel any remorse or sorrow after murdering Floyd. It's shocking to hear that from someone who puts themselves in harm's way to save another man. Hearing his narrative, though, puts things in context. His father perished in a wartime prison camp. Violence was a part of his life long before he entered the ring. He says that boxing is distinct from other sports because it is sanctioned and follows certain rules. Street violence is a complex and emotionally taxing issue. Violence, he explains to Esmeralda, is a curse that has been passed down through generations of his family, leaving invisible wounds. In the year 2021, Tarantino startled everyone by announcing that he was going to offer non-filmmaking tokens, NFTs, containing unseen footage from Pulp Fiction. The highest bidder may then digitally own these squandered moments, like the lengthy taxi journey. It wasn't that easy, though. The production company Miramax was not on board with the idea. They said in their lawsuit that Tarantino lacked the necessary rights. In response, Tarantino stated that NFTs did not exist when he signed his contract in the 1990s, and that he retained the rights to disclose items like audio recordings or handwritten texts. Regardless, Tarantino continued along as the attorneys fought. Rather than real sequences from the film, purchasers of the NFTs get scanned pages of the screenplay with Tarantino's narration in early 2022. Pulp Fiction's transformation into what it is now is an interesting tale in and of itself. Not only was it commercially successful, but it also revolutionized the way indie films were made. Despite spending only about $8 million to make the film, it grossed nearly $200 million. Big studios began to take independent films seriously, and Miramax became a force as a result. The Pulp Fiction model was now coveted by every studio. To get in on the activity, they began acquiring little indie films or establishing their own departments. No amount of money or special effects could have prevented Tarantino's picture from causing a cultural earthquake. Then there's Bruce Willis. Everything shifted when he joined Pulp Fiction. Though he was accustomed to receiving multi-million-dollar payouts as one of Hollywood's top actors, he was more interested in collaborating with Tarantino than in the film's financial rewards. A portion of the movie's budget came from that choice. Miramax received massive funding from distributors all around the globe just because Bruce Willis was a part of it. Before filming had begun, The overseas transactions had already paid for the whole production. Willis was instrumental in the film's financial success in addition to his acting role. Not only that, but he set an example for other famous people to follow. This ushered in a new era in which A-listers often hopped from independent to blockbuster, blurring the lines between creativity and money.